He is called the military brain of Russia.
I would like to highlight the participation of servicemen from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the liberation of border regions of the Kursk region.
It was he who formulated Muscovy's foreign policy ideology about the evil NATO and the Anglo-Saxon enemies.
About Poland, about Germany, about the United Kingdom, about Romania.
Well, for the UK, there won't be enough hazelnuts.
Putin's favorite general.
Valery Vasilyevich, good afternoon.
A loyal servant who secured the Tsar his first presidential term. A highly skilled staff commander theorist, profoundly despised by Russian occupiers both at the soldier and officer level.
100 extra duties.
For what?
One of the authors of the plan to seize Crimea, as well as the creeping, treacherous, and covert war against Ukraine.
Its essence lies in the active use of the protest potential of the fifth column.
Chief of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, is a key figure. Who is he? A brilliant gray cardinal of the Russian military machine, or just a narrow-minded bureaucrat, an obedient soldier, and a spineless puppet in the hands of the Tsar? March of the year 2000. In Moscow, the acting president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, is in office. Russia, shaken by Yeltsin's resignation, is preparing for presidential elections.
Elections?
At the very same time, Russian aviation and artillery are systematically wiping Grozny completely off the face of the earth. The Second Chechen War is in full swing. And our hero gets a chance to prove himself, which Valery Gerasimov does not hesitate to take advantage of.
If only I had a saber and a horse, could ride to the front lines. Palace intrigues, not my thing.
The opportunity of a lifetime comes when Gerasimov is entrusted with leading the battles for the village of Komsomolskoye. This battle will become the key event of the entire war and the last major clash in the confrontation. It was then that the pawn broke through to become a queen and managed to please his king. Despite enormous losses on both sides and sacrificing thousands of civilians, Gerasimov methodically and deliberately timed the victory to coincide with his king's election.
The residents were allowed to leave the village, but they weren't allowed to go far. They were forced to stay for several days on the outskirts of the village. But in reality, they were being used as human shields.
The battle between the Russian Armada and the Chechens, who were armed with nothing but assault rifles, for a small village lasted a full 15 days. Just a week later, on March 26th, Putin would get what he wanted, a triumph in the first round of the presidential elections. The destruction of Chechnya, and in particular the small village of Komsomolskoye, turning them into ruins, became that very small victorious war for the future terrorist number one, who at the time presented himself as the main fighter against terrorism.
We will hunt down terrorists everywhere, at the airport. So, excuse me, but if we catch them in the bathroom, we'll take them out in the toilet.
Except for this brief but personally significant combat episode for Putin, Valery Gerasimov is a typical and professional soldier and staff officer.
Everything about a person should be perfect. The epaulets, the cockade, even the underwear. Otherwise, it's not a person, but just a mammal.
As a child, Gerasimov's interest in the military was inspired by his uncle and grandfather, both war veterans. According to Gerasimov himself, World War II had a huge impact on him. According to him, the experience of the Great Patriotic War is still studied and used in planning operations in modern armed conflicts. And here it's hard to argue with Valery. The meat assaults, in which the chief of the general staff of the occupiers grinds up hundreds of thousands of his subordinates, will not let you lie.
Mom, I'm scared.
I raised a man, not a wimp.
I'm proud.
After Chechnya, Gerasimov returned to the headquarters, where he quietly languished break time equals 0.5s/ until the early 2010s, until Putin once again brought his loyal dog out into the public light. In 2011 and 2012, Gerasimov was put in charge of the parades in honor of Victory Madness Day on Red Square.
Parade. under the state flag of the Russian Federation.
Soon, the mute Gerasim, as his colleagues called him, would get the position of Chief of the General Staff and, at the same time, First Deputy to Defense Minister Shoigu.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, I present Valery Gerasimov for the position of Chief of the General Staff.
A year later, in 2013, the logistics specialist and theorist, a fan of the old-timers who fought in the war, would present his report to Putin titled The Value of Science in Foresight. Essentially, this would be the formula for hybrid warfare, which the Kremlin would use against Ukraine just a few months later.
First Deputy Defense Minister Valery Gerasimov spoke before the conference. He discussed new types of military confrontation, where armed groups, terrorists, and quasi-states fight, not countries.
In his comprehensive report, Gerasimov notably observed that modern military conflicts should fundamentally shift toward the strategic use of hybrid, non-military measures to effectively destabilize the enemy from within, utilizing political, informational, economic, and humanitarian tools.
The essence of this lies in the active use of the protest potential of the fifth column.
A few months later, Russia, following Gerasimov's blueprint, first annexed Crimea and then unleashed war in Ukraine's Donbass region.
Were those Russian soldiers or not?
Those were local self-defense forces. Of course, behind the Crimean self-defense forces stood our military personnel.
According to investigative journalists from Bellingcat, it was Gerasimov who gave the order to deploy regular Russian troops into Ukraine near Ilovaisk and to transfer Russian military equipment to the separatists in Donbass, including that very Bug missile system with which the terrorist stroke of Gherkin shot down the MH17 passenger Boeing. No matter what war crime Russia commits, whether it's starting the war against Ukraine, shooting down a passenger plane, or carpet bombing civilians in Syria's Aleppo, the reports and orders always bear the signature of the Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Army. He is the one who is, de jure, responsible for developing and planning all military operations. It is Gerasimov who is Putin's main accomplice in these crimes. Let me give you a parallel. When it came to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Gerasimov's name didn't come up very often at first. Valery, as usual, kept to the shadows. And if anyone mentioned him at all, it was only in connection with Sergei Shoigu, and that was mostly Prigozhin.
Shoigu! Gerasimov! Where the fuck are the munitions?
That's how it was right up until January 2023, when Gerasimov replaced the Butcher Surovikin as the commander of the troop grouping in Ukraine.
Under these circumstances, the most reasonable option is to organize the defense along the barrier line of the Dnipro River. Comrade Minister of Defense, after thoroughly assessing the situation, it is proposed to take up defense along the left bank of the Dnipro River.
One of Gerasimov's first actions was a massive missile strike on Ukraine and the city of Dnipro. At that time, a Russian missile destroyed a residential building. As a result of the strike, 46 people were killed and more than 80 were injured. In the West, Gerasimov received special recognition. The staff rear officer was dubbed the ideologue and the Grey Cardinal of Russian military doctrine. Journalists and experts began to talk about the Gerasimov doctrine as the Russian vision of a geopolitical war with the West, in which the Kremlin's response to so-called color revolutions is a subversive hybrid war.
3 combat sorties.
But the image of Gerasimov as an evil genius and a fearsome horseman of the apocalypse only worked for the external audience, exclusively.
You could say the horsemen of the apocalypse are already on their way.
At home, especially among the military, Putin's spineless servant commands not the slightest respect. In Russia, Gerasimov gets kicked and humiliated by literally everyone, from soldiers at the front to bloggers on the internet.
The Chief of the General Staff, indeed, is here.
You're a faggot and to hell with you.
The now imprisoned terrorist blogger Stroke of Gherkin was especially blunt in his language.
This guy, what's his name? Gerasim the Mumu. That's what bloggers call him now, I think. Well, let's put it this way. The Chief of the General Staff, Army General Gerasimov.
And the late head of Wagner PMC, Yevgeny Prigozhin, went even further. He blamed all the failures and sins on them and openly destroyed the sweet duo of Shoigu and Gerasimov.
Shoigu, Gerasimov, where are you?
Even Valery's closest subordinate generals, who sat with him in Russian headquarters, spoke disparagingly about Gerasimov.
We want to get the chief of the general staff, Kishiki. Until they show up, lock it down. Until they show up.
Still, no matter how much people mock Gerasimov, most often it's Valery who gets the last laugh. Gerasimov's main public enemy, Prigozhin, has long been in hell. The terrorist and winter stroke of Gherkin is locked up in Lefortovo.
Igor Ivanovich always criticized the actions of the Ministry of Defense leadership, and his criticism was justified.
Valery isn't just a tough old soldier. He's also a vindictive and sneaky careerist, hated by most of the Z-Patriots. It was the chief of the general staff who first destroyed the career, and then the life, of General Popov, who was popular among the troops.
So, to be honest with you, a difficult situation arose with the higher-ups, where I had to either keep quiet and act cowardly by saying what they wanted to hear, or call things by their real names.
It was Popov whom the Russian occupiers credited with the success in repelling the Ukrainian summer offensive in 23. During the fighting in southern Ukraine, Popov ended up in a conflict with Gerasimov. Valery, despite the loud outcry from the Z supporters, dealt with his adversary without much trouble. First, he dismissed him from the army, and then put his opponent behind bars for 5 years.
Comrade General, what's your assessment? Even when the storm rages and the waters rise, remember, the lighthouse doesn't leak.
Despite all the intense hate, a formidable pile of enemies, his enduring popularity within his own army, and the complete and utter lack of media support, Valery still managed to outlast even his boss and longtime reindeer herding comrade, Sergei Kazanatovich. Experts believe that, unlike Shoigu, Ivanov, and many other Russian generals turned corrupt officials, the chief of the general staff is an ideological ascetic who, at least openly and publicly, doesn't flaunt his wealth.
Everything's fine with you. Amazing. With luck like that, and still free.
That doesn't mean Gerasimov isn't embezzling from the army. He just does it on a much smaller scale, where he's much better at hiding it. Despite having a relatively modest annual income of 3 million rubles, Gerasimov owns elite real estate in the Russian capital worth over $2 million in total. However, thoroughly corrupt Putin couldn't care less about any of this. Gerasimov's real guarantee of safety is the personal favor and protection of the bunker dweller. He is perfectly satisfied with a dull, unpopular, and truly low-profile commander who will gladly credit all successes to his master and quietly shoulder all the failures himself.
And the culprit is the general, schemer, and amoral. It was him, the cow-faced bastard, who disgraced his honor with the Tsar.
Gerasimov is a loyal and completely unambitious servant of the Tsar. These are exactly the kind of people Putin likes and brings close. But even such a devoted figure is not eternal. The media reported unexpected news about the general being sent for a medical commission.
Weren't you warned that I suffer from every nervous and mental illness? And 3 more that are still unknown.
No.
Can a 70-year-old man really be completely healthy? That's more of a rhetorical question. The Kremlin's military leader, who fancies himself at least Peter the Great, clearly can't forgive Gerasimov for the disgrace in the Kursk region.
The only thing that is left now is to decide how best to settle it, to knock him out with a candelabrum, or to simply smother him with a pillow.
And even though Chief General Staff bravely reports every time about complete destruction of Ukrainian armed forces on Russian territory, facts stubbornly say otherwise.
With airstrikes, missile forces, and artillery fire, the enemy's advance deeper into the territory in the Kursk direction has been stopped.
Of course, a charismatic and successful military commander is a serious threat personally to Putin. But the inability to solve security issues in one's own regions is also a huge problem. You can twist the facts as much as you want and talk about the successes of Russian soldiers on TV. But you can't hide the presence of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk and Belgorod regions. Which means that very soon, one of the failed actors in the Kremlin theater will be replaced.
The work to finally liberate these forested areas and the mountains continues. Report concluded.
Well, if you keep being as quick as you have been so far, you cow-faced fool, I'll personally send you to the chopping block.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.